I'm Rebecca Mitchell, 28, and yesterday I finally got revenge on my brother Daniel after years of his mockery. As I stood outside the courthouse in my old waitress uniform, the one he always ridiculed me for wearing, watching him being escorted out in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel vindicated. The prestigious lawyer who drove past Pop's diner every morning in his shiny black SUV, deliberately slowing down to laugh at me serving coffee, was now facing disbarment and prison time. All because of financial records I discovered while helping our dying grandfather organize his affairs. If this is your first time hearing one of my stories, I'd love to know where you're watching from. This family drama took me years to process, and I'm finally ready to share it all with you. Hit that subscribe button if you want more true stories about family betrayal and justice finally being served. Now, let me take you back to how it all began. I grew up in Oak Ridge, one of those small towns where everybody knows your name and your business. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Pop's Diner sat right on Main Street, a staple in our community since before I was born. My grandfather Edmund Mitchell Pop, to everyone who knew him, opened it after retiring from his corporate job in the city. At least, that's what I thought at the time. My childhood was pretty normal until I turned 19. That's when my parents, Robert and Susan Mitchell, died in a car accident coming home from their anniversary dinner. A drunk driver crossed the center line on Route 16, and just like that, Daniel and I became orphans in our late teens and early 20s. Pop stepped in immediately. He'd already raised us alongside our parents since Mom worked full-time at the bank and Dad traveled often for his sales job. Pop was our rock, our foundation. He'd been running the diner solo since Grandma passed from cancer 5 years earlier, and now he took on raising his grandkids alone, too. Daniel was 22 when our parents died, in his second year at State University. I was 19, just starting community college and working part-time at the diner. The insurance money from our parents' accident and their modest savings went mostly toward Daniel's law school dreams. Nobody questioned this at the time. Daniel had always been the smart one, the family's great hope. He had the grades and ambition to become something big while I was still figuring out what I wanted. "Rebecca's just finding her path," Pop would say when people asked about my future plans. "She's got time." In those early days, Daniel and I were close. We processed our grief together, staying up late in Pop's living room above the diner, reminiscing about Mom and Dad. He'd come home weekends from school, help out waiting tables, joke with the regulars. He was still my big brother then, protective and kind despite occasional sibling squabbles. But something changed when Daniel transferred to an elite law school in the city. Each visit home, he seemed more distant, more different. His clothes got fancier, his friends were all from wealthy families, and he started making comments about the diner. "This place is so," he'd look around, wrinkling his nose, "quaint." The summer before his final year of law school, Pop had his first health scare. The doctor diagnosed him with early Parkinson's disease. It wasn't immediately debilitating, but it made the physical demands of running a diner much harder. That was when I made my decision. I put my education on hold to help Pop full-time. It wasn't even really a choice in my mind. He'd sacrificed so much for us, and now he needed me. "It's just temporary," I told myself. "Just until Pop's medication stabilizes." Daniel didn't see it that way. "You're wasting your potential, Becca," he said during a rare visit home. He'd started calling me Becca instead of Becky or Beck like he used to. "You're going to wake up one day and realize you've thrown your life away serving pancakes." "Someone has to help Pop," I replied. "So hire someone. Use some of your college money. You know we can't afford that." This became our pattern. Every conversation circled back to my wasted potential and how I was settling for a life beneath me. What Daniel didn't understand or chose not to see was that I actually enjoyed working at the diner. I loved our regulars. Judy Anderson, who came in every morning at 6:30 a.m. sharp for black coffee and wheat toast. Mark Lawson, the high school English teacher who graded papers in booth 7 every Tuesday afternoon. The group of retired men who occupied the corner table from 7 to 9 a.m. daily, solving the world's problems over endless coffee refills. These people became my extended family while Daniel built his new life in the city. He interned at Morgan and Whitfield, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state. He met Laura Harrington, daughter of a state senator, and his soon-to-be fiancée. He bought designer suits and, eventually, that black BMW X5 SUV he was so proud of, a graduation gift to himself, he claimed. Meanwhile, Pop's health gradually declined. The tremors became more pronounced. He dropped things more often. The medical bills started piling up despite Medicare. The diner's profits were steady but modest, and increasingly went toward keeping Pop comfortable rather than keeping the business updated. I tried bringing up our financial situation with Daniel a few times. "Can't you help out a little more? Pop put you through school? I've got student loans, Becca. Besides, Pop wanted me to focus on my career. That's his investment in the future." By this point, Daniel visited maybe twice a year, usually for less than a day. He always had some excuse case prep, networking events, Laura's family functions. But he never failed to remind me how I was squandering my life when he did grace us with his presence. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. every morning. By 5, I'd unlock Pop's diner, flip on the lights, and start the coffee. Prep work followed, cutting fresh fruit, mixing batter for the day's pancakes and waffles, filling salt and pepper shakers, wiping down already clean counters. Our cook, Joe, arrived at 5:30 to prep the grill and start the bacon. By 6 a.m., we opened our doors to the early crowd, mostly factory workers from the plant outside town and farmers wanting breakfast before dawn chores. Pop would join us around 7 a.m. on his good days, sitting at the counter, helping with the register, chatting with customers. On bad days, I'd bring him breakfast upstairs to the apartment before starting my shift. Then came 8:15 a.m. Every weekday, like clockwork. The first time it happened, I thought it was a coincidence. Daniel's new apartment in the city was a 30-minute drive from Oak Ridge, but his law firm's satellite office was on the other side of our town. It made sense he'd drive past the diner on his commute. I was refilling coffees when I heard the distinctive rumble of his BMW engine slowing down outside. Looking up, I saw Daniel behind the wheel, designer sunglasses on, despite the overcast day. He looked right at me through the window, smirked, and drove on. The second day, he honked. Not a friendly beep, but a long, attention-grabbing blare that made everyone in the diner look up. Again, the smirk. Again, the slow drive by. By the end of the first week, it had become a ritual. Sometimes he'd roll down his window and make a comment as he passed. "Still serving eggs, Becca? Living the dream. Nice uniform. Does it come in adult sizes?" "Tell Pop I said hi." "Oh wait, you always do because you never leave." The regulars noticed, of course. Judy asked me once, "Who's that rude fella in the fancy car?" "My brother," I answered, feeling my cheeks burn with shame. "Your brother?" She looked shocked. Why would he act that way? I didn't have a good answer. The worst incident happened during our town's annual summer festival. I was volunteering at the diner's booth, serving our famous blueberry pancakes as a fundraiser for the local food bank. Daniel showed up with Laura, both dressed like they'd stepped out of a magazine, clearly uncomfortable in our small-town setting. I waved and called out, "Daniel, come try some pancakes." He pretended not to hear me, steering Laura in the opposite direction. Later, I overheard him telling her friends, "My sister? No, she's not here today." I was standing 10 feet away. Laura was no better. At their engagement party, which I was invited to only after Pop insisted she introduced me to her friends as Daniel's sister, the career waitress, the way she said career made it sound like the punchline of a joke. Her friends tittered, giving me that particular look reserved for someone they considered beneath them. Through it all, Pop remained largely unaware. His cognitive abilities had started to slip alongside his physical decline, and I worked hard to shield him from the growing rift between his grandchildren. On his clearer days, he'd ask about Daniel. "Has Danny called? Is he coming to visit soon?" "He's really busy, Pop," I'd say. "Big case at work." "He's doing important things," Pop would nod, pride in his eyes. My grandson, the lawyer. Meanwhile, I struggled to keep the diner afloat. Equipment broke down. The roof leaked during heavy rains. Property taxes increased. I started dipping into my own meager savings, then took out a small personal loan to cover unexpected expenses. Daniel's occasional checks, usually sent around Christmas or Pop's birthday, barely made a dent. The mockery continued. The morning drive-bys, the smirks, the honking, the occasional rolled-down window with a new taunt. "How's the grease trap today, Becca? Saved enough tips for community college yet?" "Laura and I are house hunting. Probably costs more than that diner." I coped by writing everything in a journal, detailing each incident, each cruel comment. Not for revenge, at least, not initially, but as therapy. Some nights I'd cry myself to sleep, wondering how the brother who once protected me from playground bullies had become my primary tormentor. The diner began falling behind on bills. The tax notices became more threatening. Pop's medication costs increased. And every morning at 8:15, a black BMW would slow down outside our window, a physical reminder of the brother who had everything and still wanted more. I wonder if you've ever experienced something similar in your own family, when someone who should have your back seems to enjoy watching you struggle? If so, leave a comment below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences can be surprisingly comforting. Now, let me tell you how everything started to unravel. It was a Tuesday morning in April when Joe called up to the apartment. "Rebecca, your grandpa's not looking too good." I rushed downstairs to find Pop sitting at the counter, his face ashen, one side drooping slightly. When he tried to speak, his words slurred. Classic stroke symptoms. The ambulance arrived within minutes. I rode with him to County General, clutching his hand as the paramedics worked. "You're going to be okay, Pop," I kept saying, more to reassure myself than him. The next 48 hours were a blur of hospital corridors, doctor consultations, and tests. The diagnosis: a moderate stroke affecting his left side. Not immediately life-threatening, but serious given his already compromised health from Parkinson's. I called Daniel immediately. "Pop's had a stroke. He's stable but in serious condition. Can you come?" "I'm in the middle of preparing for a major client meeting," he replied. "I'll try to drive down this weekend." "This weekend?" "Daniel, this is Pop we're talking about." "I understand, Becca, but I can't just drop everything. Some of us have professional obligations." The barb stung, but I was too worried about Pop to engage. "Fine, just try to come soon. He keeps asking for you." Daniel did visit, briefly, that Sunday afternoon. He spent 40 minutes at the hospital, mostly on his phone, before claiming he needed to get back to prepare for Monday meetings. With Pop in the hospital, I needed to handle the diner and our household affairs alone. While sorting through papers to find Pop's insurance information, I discovered a stack of medical bills in his desk drawer, far more than I'd realized, many with final notice stamped across them. Digging deeper, I found his will, last updated shortly after our parents died. It stated that Pop's assets were to be divided equally between Daniel and me. Nothing surprising there, but it made me wonder what exactly those assets included beyond the diner and the apartment above it. In a locked bottom drawer, the key hidden beneath the drawer liner, I found investment statements, property deeds, and bank records that made my heart race. Pop hadn't been just a small-town diner owner scraping by. Before opening Pop's diner, Edmund Mitchell had been a highly successful investment banker. The diner was his retirement project, a way to stay active in the community he loved, not his primary source of income. The statements showed investment accounts worth nearly $4 million. There were property deeds for 3 rental houses in neighboring counties. There were certificates for bonds and dividend-paying stocks. All this time, we'd been wealthy. More disturbing were the withdrawal records. Large sums had been steadily moving out of these accounts over the past 5 years, coinciding with Daniel's law school years and early career. A $65,000 transfer labeled D Education Fund, a $42,000 wire with the memo D Car Loan, a $175,000 withdrawal noted as D House Down Payment. There was nothing comparable for our education or anything else with my initial. I brought in Harold Jenkins, a financial advisor who often had breakfast at the diner, to help me make sense of the records. His expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the documents. Rebecca, I don't want to alarm you, but these transactions are concerning. Many of them required power of attorney to execute. Daniel has Pop's power of attorney, I explained. For emergencies. Harold frowned. These don't look like emergencies, and there's no documentation showing these were loans rather than gifts. I also contacted Thomas Williams, Pop's longtime friend and attorney who had drafted his will. Edmund always intended for you both to share equally, Thomas confirmed when I showed him the records. He was especially concerned that your education be funded when you decided to return to school. But I never received any money for education. That's surprising. Edmund set up educational trusts for both of you after your parents passed. The more I discovered, the more questions I had. When I visited Pop in the hospital the next day, he'd improved enough to have brief conversations, though his speech remained slurred. Pop, I found some financial papers while looking for your insurance information, I began carefully. His eyes showed recognition, then concern. Did you mean for Daniel to have access to your investment accounts? Limited. For school, he managed to say. Did you know he's taken over $700,000 in total? Pop's face registered shock, then distress. He tried to speak but became agitated when the words wouldn't form properly. It's okay, Pop. Don't get upset. We'll figure it out, I soothed, regretting having brought it up so soon after his stroke. That evening, I confronted Daniel when he finally answered his phone. I found Pop's financial records. A pause. What records? All of them, Daniel. The investment accounts, the properties, the withdrawals. Those were arranged with Pop's full knowledge and consent, he said smoothly. He wanted to invest in my future. And what about my future? What about my education trust? Another pause. You chose to stay at the diner, Becca. That was your decision. That doesn't mean I forfeited my education fund, and it definitely doesn't explain why you took money for a house and a luxury car. Pop wanted me to have the lifestyle appropriate for a Morgan and Whitfield attorney, he said, his tone condescending. Image matters in my profession, he understood that. I'm going to speak with his doctors tomorrow about his competency over the past few years, I said. And I'm meeting with Thomas Williams again to discuss the withdrawals. Don't threaten me, Rebecca. Daniel's voice turned cold. You're out of your depth. When I hung up, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from anger. All those mornings being mocked for working at the diner, all while Daniel was draining Pop's accounts to fund his prestigious lifestyle. The next 2 weeks became a balancing act running the diner, visiting Pop daily as he began rehabilitation, and investigating the financial discrepancies I'd discovered. I created a schedule. Diner from 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., hospital from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., financial detective work from 6 p.m. until I couldn't keep my eyes open. Sleep for a few hours. Repeat. Thomas Williams proved invaluable, explaining legal documents and helping me understand my options. This could constitute elder financial abuse, he explained, during one of our meetings in his cluttered office. Especially if Edmund wasn't fully aware of the extent of the withdrawals. What evidence would we need? Bank records showing unauthorized transactions, documentation of Daniel's power of attorney being used improperly, testimony about your grandfather's mental state during the period in question. I methodically gathered everything Thomas suggested, creating a detailed timeline of withdrawals alongside Pop's documented health decline. A breakthrough came when Judy Anderson, my regular 6:30 a.m. customer, mentioned her daughter Rita worked as a forensic accountant. She helps track down financial fraud, Judy explained. Would you like me to ask if she'd meet with you? Rita Thompson arrived at the diner after closing the following Monday. Sharp-eyed and direct, she reviewed the files I'd organized. There's definitely a pattern here, she noted, pointing to a series of withdrawals. See how they cluster around major milestones in your brother's career? Bar exam, firm hiring, partnership track. And look at these offshore transfers beginning last year. Offshore transfers? To an account in the Cayman Islands. Usually not a good sign. Rita helped me create a proper forensic accounting document, organizing all transactions chronologically and flagging suspicious activities. My next step was confronting Laura, Daniel's fiancée. I invited her for coffee at a cafe in the city, away from Daniel's usual haunts. I appreciate you meeting me, I began when she arrived, looking uncomfortable and out of place despite the upscale setting. Daniel wouldn't approve, she said, checking her phone nervously. That's why I asked you not to tell him. Laura, I need to know how much you know about Daniel's financial arrangements. Her eyes darted around the cafe. What do you mean? The money he's taken from our grandfather. The offshore accounts. Laura's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she set down her untouched cappuccino. I don't know what you're talking about. Laura, please. Pop is in the hospital. The diner is struggling because Daniel has drained the accounts that were meant to support both of us. If you know anything, he's going to sell it, she blurted out, then looked horrified at her own words. Sell what? The diner. Once your grandfather. She trailed off. There's a developer interested in the whole block. Daniel's been in talks with them for months. I felt physically ill. While Pop is still alive? He can't sell it without Pop's consent. Laura wouldn't meet my eyes. He has power of attorney. And he says your grandfather isn't competent anymore. This revelation led me to my next discovery. While using Daniel's laptop he'd left at Pop's apartment during his brief visit searching for any evidence of these developer negotiations, I found a draft real estate listing for the diner property. The document was dated 3 months earlier, well before Pop's stroke. But the most disturbing information came from an unexpected source, James Harrington, Laura's brother. He called me out of the blue one evening. Rebecca? It's James, Laura's brother. We met at the engagement party. Yes, I remember. Laura told me you two talked. There's something you should know about Daniel. He paused. He's got gambling debts, serious ones. To people you don't want to owe money to. Gambling debts? Daniel? Started in law school, got worse when he joined the firm. High-stakes poker, sports betting. Laura doesn't know the full extent, but I've bailed him out twice. The pieces were falling into place, the increasing withdrawals, the offshore accounts, the desperate need to sell the diner property. As my investigation deepened, Daniel's behavior changed. He began visiting Pop more often, always when I wasn't there. He installed monitoring software on Pop's home computer. He collected Pop's mail before I could see it. I countered by moving all important documents to a safe deposit box at First National, using Post Office Box 210 for any new correspondence, and setting up a separate email account for communications with Thomas and Rita. If any of you have ever discovered family secrets that completely changed how you viewed someone close to you, you know that horrible sinking feeling in your stomach. It's like the floor drops out from under you. How do you deal with learning that someone you once looked up to has been living a double life? Drop a comment below if you've been through something similar. Meanwhile, Daniel's control over our family's affairs was about to reach a whole new level. 3 weeks after Pop's stroke, while he was still in rehabilitation, I received an official-looking envelope. Inside was a petition for emergency conservatorship, filed by Daniel Mitchell on behalf of Edmund Mitchell. The document painted a disturbing picture of me. According to the petition, I was emotionally unstable, financially irresponsible, and exploiting an elderly relative's vulnerability for personal gain. Daniel claimed that Pop needed protection from my attempts to manipulate his assets. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday, giving me barely 4 days to prepare. He's trying to get ahead of us, Thomas Williams said when I showed him the paperwork. Daniel knows what you've discovered, and he's making a preemptive strike. Can he do this? Unfortunately, yes. And as an attorney with connections to the court system, he has advantages we don't. Can you represent me? Thomas looked pained. Rebecca, I'd like to, but I'm primarily a real estate attorney. This requires someone versed in elder law and conservatorship. And frankly, Anyone local will be intimidated by opposing Morgan and Whitfield. I spent the weekend researching conservatorship law and preparing my own response to Daniel's petition. The hearing, held in Judge Elizabeth Morris's chambers, was a disaster from the start. Daniel arrived in a perfectly tailored suit, accompanied by a senior partner from his firm. I wore my best outfit, a simple blouse and skirt, that suddenly seemed shabby by comparison. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the papers before addressing us. "Mr. Mitchell, you're seeking emergency conservatorship over your grandfather's affairs?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel replied, his voice confident and professional. "Unfortunately, my sister's recent behavior has raised serious concerns about my grandfather's welfare and assets." He proceeded to weave a narrative so cunningly twisted that I barely recognized myself in it. According to Daniel, I had isolated Pop, prevented him from seeking proper medical care until his stroke, and begun transferring diner proceeds to personal accounts. When my turn came, my voice shook despite my efforts to stay calm. "Your Honor, these allegations are completely false. I've been caring for Pop daily while Daniel visits maybe twice a year. I've never— Do you have documentation of your grandfather's medical appointments? Financial records showing proper business management?" the judge interrupted. "Not with me, but I can provide." "Miss Mitchell, these are serious concerns that require immediate attention." Judge Morris frowned. "Without countervailing evidence, I must prioritize your grandfather's protection." By the end of the 30-minute hearing, Daniel had been granted temporary conservatorship over Pop's person and estate, pending a full hearing in 60 days. I was permitted supervised visits and required to turn over all financial documents related to the diner. Daniel wasted no time. By that afternoon, he had frozen my access to all business accounts. The diner's checking account, which I used to pay staff and suppliers, was suddenly inaccessible. What am I supposed to do? I asked him when he showed up at the diner that evening after closing. "We have food deliveries tomorrow. Staff payroll is due Friday. You should have thought about that before you started poking around in matters that don't concern you," he replied, casually examining the vintage Coca-Cola signs Pop had collected. "Maybe it's time to close this place down. It's barely profitable anyway. It's Pop's life's work. It's a tax write-off that's outlived its usefulness." Daniel straightened his tie. "I'll be conducting a full inventory tomorrow. Don't remove anything from the premises." The next 2 weeks were among the most challenging I'd ever faced. I had to borrow money from friends to pay the staff. Several regulars, hearing about our situation, organized a Save Pop's Diner fundraiser that covered immediate expenses. Joe the cook offered to work for tips until things stabilized. Mark Lawson, the English teacher, brought in homemade signs to put up around town. The community rallied around us, but Daniel only intensified his efforts. He showed up one morning with a property assessor, walking through the diner during our busiest time, disrupting service as they measured spaces and took photographs. "What's going on?" I demanded. "Just updating the insurance valuation," Daniel said smoothly, though the assessor couldn't meet my eyes. I later learned from Thomas Williams that Daniel had listed the property with a commercial real estate broker, contingent on vacancy upon sale. The final straw came when I discovered, through Rita's continued investigation, that Daniel had been charging Pop's accounts for legal services $350 per hour for estate management and healthcare coordination. He had billed over $42,000 in the past year alone for services that, as family, he should have provided for free. Laura began to waver in her support of Daniel as she witnessed his treatment of family. She called me late one night, her voice hushed. "Rebecca, he's not the person I thought he was." "How long have you known about all this, Laura?" "Not everything. Not at first. He told me you were unstable, that you resented his success. I believed him because it was easier. And now? I saw how he acted at the hospital yesterday. Your grandfather was asking for you. And Daniel told him you were too busy at the diner to visit, when he's the one who scheduled your supervised visits for times you have to work." Laura became an unexpected ally, quietly feeding me information about Daniel's plans and activities. She also revealed that Daniel had been recording our conversations, hoping to catch me saying something he could use against me in the upcoming conservatorship hearing. I decided to turn this tactic back on him. The next time Daniel visited the diner to inspect the property, I had my phone recording in my apron pocket. "The developers want to close next month," he said, examining the antique cash register Pop had lovingly restored. "We'll need to start clearing everything out." Pop isn't even out of rehab yet. This place means everything to him. Daniel laughed. Pop doesn't even remember owning this place half the time. Besides, his signature is on the power of attorney. Everything I've done is perfectly legal, including draining his accounts for your gambling debts. His head snapped up. "What did you say?" "James Harrington told me everything, Daniel. The poker losses, the sports betting, the loan sharks." His face darkened. James should mind his own business. "How much did you take in total? 700,000? 800? "I earned that money," Daniel hissed, suddenly losing his cool. "Pop wanted me to have it. I'm the one who made something of myself, not you. I deserve it for putting up with this backward town and this greasy spoon all these years." "And the offshore accounts? The fake legal billing? Did Pop want you to have that too?" "You can't prove anything." But his confidence was cracking. "No one will believe a waitress over an attorney from Morgan and Whitfield. We'll see about that." The next day, Daniel retaliated by firing Joe and our 2 part-time waitresses, claiming budget restructuring. He changed the visitation rules at the rehabilitation facility, restricting my access to Pop to 1 hour on Sunday afternoons when he knew the diner was busiest. But his most dangerous move was yet to come. Through Laura, I learned that Daniel had been falsifying billing records for several of his firm's clients, padding hours to boost his compensation and help cover his gambling losses. If exposed, it wouldn't just cost him his job, it could lead to disbarment and criminal charges. It was the leverage I needed, but using it meant potentially destroying my brother's career and our family's reputation. Despite everything, that decision kept me awake at night. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Diana Nelson, a partner at Caldwell and Schmidt Morgan and Whitfield's main competitor, was a semi-regular at the diner. She usually came in for a late lunch on Fridays, always ordered the turkey club, and tipped generously. "I heard about your situation," she said one afternoon, lingering after paying her bill. "Your brother works for Preston Morgan, doesn't he?" "Yes, he does." Preston and I were law school classmates. Her expression was carefully neutral. "We're not friends." She slid her business card across the counter. "Call my office. I'd like to help." Diana provided invaluable guidance on how to report attorney misconduct to the State Bar Association. "Document everything," she advised during our meeting in her sleek downtown office. "Dates, times, amounts, witnesses. The bar takes financial impropriety extremely seriously, especially when it involves vulnerable clients." Working with Thomas Williams, Rita Thompson, and now Diana Nelson, I compiled a comprehensive evidence package. Financial records showing the pattern of withdrawals from Pop's accounts, documentation of Daniel using his power of attorney beyond its intended scope, records of his improper legal billing to Pop, testimonies from Pop's friends about his wishes for the diner and his estate. Greg Mullins, a retired accountant who ate breakfast at the diner every Thursday, helped me authenticate all the financial records. "I worked for the IRS for 30 years, he confided. "I know exactly what they look for in cases like this." I approached the district attorney's office with Diana's recommendation, meeting with Assistant DA Carol Martinez. She reviewed my evidence with professional detachment. "There's enough here to warrant investigation," she concluded. "Financial elder abuse is a growing problem, and we've been directed to prioritize these cases." Throughout this process, I wrestled with my conscience. Daniel was still my brother. Despite his cruelty, despite his theft, some part of me remembered the boy who taught me to ride a bike, who defended me against neighborhood bullies, who held my hand at our parents' funeral. Was I really prepared to see him prosecuted? Potentially imprisoned? You don't have to decide everything now, Diana counseled. Start with the bar complaint and the petition to revoke his conservatorship. See how he responds. Pop's condition continued to improve in rehabilitation. His speech became clearer, his understanding sharper. During my restricted Sunday visits, I was careful not to upset him with details of the conflict with Daniel, but he sensed something was wrong. Why Daniel not bring you more? He asked during one visit, his speech still slightly slurred. He's busy, Pop. Work stuff. Pop shook his head, frustration evident. Not right. Then came a breakthrough. During physical therapy, Pop regained enough dexterity to write short messages. During one Sunday visit, he laboriously scrawled on a notepad. Daniel took money? I couldn't lie to him. Yes, Pop, quite a bit. For school only, he wrote, his face darkening with anger. Not house, not car. I know, Pop, we're working to fix it. He wrote again, more slowly. Diner stays. Promise. I promise, Pop. This conversation strengthened my resolve. The next morning, I received a panicked call from Laura. Rebecca, Daniel's getting suspicious. He found some notes I took from your conversation. He's coming to the diner. Now. I barely had time to warn Joe and our newly rehired waitstaff before Daniel's BMW screeched into the parking lot. He stormed in, face flushed with rage. What have you been telling Laura? He demanded, loud enough that several customers looked up from their meals. What lies have you been spreading? This isn't the time or place, Daniel, I said calmly, continuing to pour coffee for the startled diners. You think you can turn my fiancé against me? You think anyone will believe you over me? He grabbed my arm, spilling coffee on both of us. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, Joe said, stepping out from the kitchen, his imposing frame suddenly blocking Daniel's path. This is my property, Daniel shouted. I have conservatorship. That doesn't give you the right to assault staff, Joe replied evenly. Please leave before I call the police. Daniel's gaze swept the diner, taking in the hostile stares from our regulars. For perhaps the first time, he realized he had no allies here. This isn't over, he hissed before storming out. It wasn't over, but the confrontation crystallized my decision. That afternoon, I filed the bar complaint Diana had helped me prepare, documenting Daniel's financial exploitation of Pop and his misuse of client funds at Morgan and Whitfield. The next morning, Thomas Williams filed a petition to revoke Daniel's conservatorship, including Pop's handwritten statement opposing Daniel's control of his assets. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office had begun a formal investigation into potential criminal elder abuse charges. Laura provided the final piece of evidence we needed. After Daniel's outburst at the diner, she searched their home office and found documents Daniel had removed from Pop's house, including original copies of client billing records showing deliberate inflation of hours and a USB drive containing transfers to the Cayman Islands account. She called me in tears. I can't be part of this anymore. I thought I was marrying someone who cared about justice. Bring everything to Diana Nelson's office, I instructed her. She'll know what to do. The evidence Laura provided confirmed what we'd suspected but couldn't prove. Daniel had been systematically stealing from clients as well as from Pop, using the offshore account to hide the money. The amounts were staggering, nearly $1.2 million diverted from client trust accounts over 3 years. With this evidence, the district attorney's office moved quickly. They coordinated with the State Bar Association's Ethics Committee to build a comprehensive case. As these legal wheels turned, I faced my own moral crossroads. Among Laura's documents was evidence that Daniel had developed a gambling addiction during law school, evidence that might reduce his sentence if introduced during trial. Though his addiction didn't excuse his actions, it helped explain them. Did I want my brother to serve the maximum sentence possible? Or did I have an obligation to present the complete picture, even if it might lead to leniency? I discussed this with no one, not even Diana or Thomas. This decision was mine alone to make. The State Bar Association Ethics Committee moved with surprising speed. 3 weeks after receiving our complaint, they conducted an emergency hearing, temporarily suspending Daniel's law license, pending full investigation. Morgan and Whitfield placed him on administrative leave the same day. Preston Morgan himself called me, his tone carefully professional. "Miss Mitchell, I want to assure you that our firm had no knowledge of your brother's activities. We're conducting our own internal review and cooperating fully with authorities." Daniel was served with the ethics complaint at the firm's offices, a public humiliation he had never anticipated. According to Laura, who had postponed but not yet canceled their engagement, he returned home in a state of panic. "He's shredding documents," she texted me that evening, "deleting files." I immediately alerted Diana, who contacted the district attorney. By morning, investigators had a warrant to search Daniel's office and home computer. What they found exceeded even our expectations. In his desperation to cover his tracks, Daniel had left digital footprints everywhere, deleted files that were easily recovered, hasty emails to contacts in the Cayman Islands, frantic Google searches on avoiding extradition and countries without U.S. treaties. The emergency hearing to review Daniel's conservatorship took place before Judge Morris again, but this time I came prepared. With Thomas Williams representing me, Diana Nelson providing expert testimony on legal ethics, and a financial forensic report from Rita Thompson, the evidence was overwhelming. Most impactful was Pop himself. Now able to communicate more clearly, he testified via video link from the rehabilitation facility, explaining that he had never authorized Daniel to use the power of attorney for personal expenses beyond education costs. "Wanted both grandchildren equal," he stated firmly. "Rebecca never got her share." Judge Morris, visibly disturbed by the evidence presented, revoked Daniel's conservatorship immediately. "I find Mr. Daniel Mitchell's actions constitute a gross violation of fiduciary duty," she stated. "Temporary conservatorship is hereby transferred to Miss Rebecca Mitchell, pending final determination of Mr. Edmund Mitchell's capacity." With control of Pop's finances restored, I gained access to records. Daniel had concealed, revealing even more extensive abuse than we had documented. He had mortgaged Pop's rental properties without permission. He had taken loans against Pop's life insurance policy. He had even attempted to sell the diner building to developers while claiming to merely update insurance valuations. In total, he had misappropriated nearly $1.8 million from Pop's estate over 5 years, all while mocking me for wasting my life at the diner. The district attorney filed criminal charges for elder financial abuse, fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of client funds. Daniel's former colleagues at Morgan and Whitfield distanced themselves immediately. Preston Morgan issued a public statement expressing shock and dismay at the allegations, emphasizing that the firm had been unaware of any impropriety. Daniel's attempt to flee jurisdiction was almost comical in its desperation. Laura, now actively cooperating with investigators, alerted me that he had purchased a one-way ticket to Belize, a country with limited extradition agreements with the United States. Authorities intercepted him at the airport, his carry-on containing $50,000 in cash and several falsified identification documents. The image of Daniel being led away in handcuffs, his designer suit rumpled, his expression shell-shocked, made the front page of the local paper and was picked up by several legal industry publications. The day after Daniel's arrest, I visited him at the county detention center. The brother, who had once seemed so powerful, sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, unshaven, hollow-eyed. "Why are you here?" he asked dully. "Come to gloat?" "No, Daniel. I came to understand." "Understand what?" "How it feels to lose everything. You should know you've been a loser all your life." Even now, he couldn't resist the barb. But it no longer had power to hurt me. I came to understand how my brother became someone who could steal from his sick grandfather and mock his sister for caring for him. Pop wanted me to succeed. Pop wanted both of us to succeed, Daniel. You just decided your success was more important than mine. He looked away. The gambling got out of control. I needed the money to cover debts, then to keep up appearances at the firm. It wasn't personal. The mockery felt pretty personal. He had no answer for that. Did you ever think about what would happen to Pop if he found out what you'd done? I asked. How it would hurt him to know his grandson betrayed him this way. He wasn't supposed to find out. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. He was supposed to just not be around when it all came to light. The callousness of this statement left me speechless. I stood to leave. Rebecca, he called as I turned away. What happens now? You face the consequences of your actions, I replied simply. Just like the rest of us do. The media coverage of Daniel's case had unexpected effects on the diner. Initially, business dropped as people avoided what they perceived as a family scandal. But as the full story emerged of the humble waitress exposing her high-powered lawyer brother's fraud to protect their grandfather, public sentiment shifted dramatically. Pop's Diner became something of a local sensation. Customers came from neighboring towns to eat where that waitress who caught her crooked lawyer brother worked. A regional news station did a feature on our small-town diner with a big story. For a few weeks, we had lines out the door. I tried to shield Pop from the worst of the media coverage, but he insisted on knowing everything. My fault, he said during one of our conversations at the rehabilitation facility. Gave Daniel too much, not enough guidance. It's not your fault, Pop. Daniel made his choices. Proud of you, Rebecca, he said, reaching for my hand with his still trembling one. Always was. Those simple words healed something in me that had been broken for a long time. Daniel eventually accepted a plea deal, 5 years in state prison for elder abuse and fraud, with additional supervised release. He agreed to full restitution of all stolen funds, though the total exceeded $2 million when client accounts were included. His law license was revoked, with the possibility to reapply after 10 years, though the likelihood of reinstatement was slim given the nature of his crimes. The plea deal included one element I had insisted upon: mandatory gambling addiction treatment during and after his incarceration. I had decided to submit the evidence of his addiction, not to excuse his actions, but to ensure he received appropriate treatment. Despite everything, he was still my brother. Laura returned her engagement ring and moved to Chicago to start fresh, but not before providing a full statement to investigators about her knowledge of Daniel's activities. She expressed genuine remorse for her role in the mockery and for not coming forward sooner. Pop made a remarkable recovery, regaining most of his speech and mobility, though the combined effects of the stroke and Parkinson's meant he would never again run the diner himself. With the recovered funds from Daniel's offshore accounts and the canceled property sale, we were able to pay off all outstanding medical bills and tax obligations. We hired Melissa Gardner, a restaurant management graduate who had worked for us part-time during college, to take over day-to-day operations of Pop's Diner. This allowed me to reduce my hours to part-time and finally pursue my long-delayed education dreams. At 28, I enrolled at State University's business program, taking mostly evening classes so I could still help with the diner's morning rush. My first accounting class was both intimidating and exhilarating. Being the oldest student in the room took some adjustment, but the practical experience I'd gained running the diner gave me advantages my younger classmates lacked. 3 months into Daniel's incarceration, I visited him again. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim acceptance of his situation. He had enrolled in the prison's GED tutoring program, a far cry from his prestigious law career, but something constructive nonetheless. "Why are you here, Rebecca?" he asked, echoing his question from our first visit. "Because you're still my brother," I replied. "And I think Pop would want me to check on you." "How is he?" "Better. Hey, misses you." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I can never face him again. Maybe not now. But someday, when you've made amends, there might be a way back." "Why would you even want that? After everything I did to you?" I considered this carefully before answering. "Because family is complicated, Daniel. It's not all good or all bad. I remember the brother who taught me to ride a bike and held my hand at Mom and Dad's funeral. That person is still in there somewhere. We didn't reconcile that day, or in the visits that followed. But something shifted, a tiny opening, where before there had been only walls of resentment and betrayal. Pop insisted on revising his will once he was stable enough to do so. Despite everything that had happened, he still left Daniel a portion of his estate, much smaller than originally intended, but something. Everyone deserves second chance, Pop said firmly when I questioned this decision. When he's ready. The bulk of the estate would now be divided between me and a new scholarship fund for service industry workers seeking higher education, the Edmund and Rebecca Mitchell Opportunity Scholarship. 6 months after Daniel's imprisonment, I drove past the county correctional facility on my way to morning classes. My used Honda Civic was nowhere near as flashy as Daniel's BMW had been, but it was paid for honestly, and it was mine. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Daniel had driven past the diner, mocking me for serving coffee while he lived his prestigious lawyer life. Now, I drove past his prison on my way to building my own future, on my own terms. The following spring, I stood in the university auditorium in my cap and gown, having completed my associate's degree with honors. Pop was in the audience, beaming with pride, supported by Joe and Melissa. I had been accepted to the bachelor's program in business administration, with plans to eventually earn my MBA. The diner continued to thrive under our shared management. We expanded the menu, renovated the aging kitchen, and even opened for dinner service 3 nights a week. Pop still came in most mornings, sitting at his regular spot at the counter, chatting with customers, the heart and soul of the place that bore his name. In quiet moments, I sometimes reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. How Daniel's cruelty and betrayal had ultimately led to opportunities I might never have pursued otherwise. How his mockery of my wasted potential had eventually pushed me to prove to him, to myself, to everyone that success comes in many forms, not all of them involving luxury cars and designer suits. I didn't feel triumph over Daniel's downfall, only sadness for what could have been if he had chosen a different path. But I did feel triumph over the self-doubt his mockery had planted in me. I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed, forged in the crucible of family betrayal and the fight for justice. The diner was no longer just Pop's legacy, it was becoming mine as well. Not a fallback or a temporary job, but a choice, a business I was proud to be associated with. And my education wasn't an escape from that life, but an enhancement to it. Success, I had learned, isn't measured by the car you drive past your siblings in. It's measured by integrity, by the lives you touch, by staying true to your values, even when it would be easier not to. I hope my story resonates with some of you who might be going through similar family struggles. Sometimes the person who should support you the most becomes your biggest critic, and that kind of betrayal cuts deeper than any other. If my experience has taught me anything, it's that your worth isn't determined by others' opinions of you, even family. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was taking advantage of someone vulnerable? How did you handle that impossible situation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you found any value in hearing about my journey from mockery to vindication, please consider subscribing and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear that family loyalty should be earned, not exploited. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most important family lessons come from those who show us exactly who we don't want to become. Like, subscribe, and I'll be back next week with another true story of family justice served.